Today we're going to study Zayin Amud Beis, hopefully get beyond that. So we're on the bottom of Zayin Amud Aleph, 2 lines up before the bottom, V'ein nirin chatzoyim. So we had a brisa that says, Ein nirin lechatzoyim, kind of an ambiguous statement in the brisa, so perhaps we can interpret it that all of Klal Yisrael has to be Makayim the mitzvah of Re'iyah. But the Gemara is not going to be happy with that pshat, but rather we're going to darshan something from the pasuk kol zechur, for the extra kol. And if what the Torah is telling us is kol zechur, that we need all of Klal Yisrael there for the Re'iyah, then it could have left out the word kol. It could have said zechur. We would have assumed since no one was excluded from zechur, therefore it means kol zechur. So why did the Torah have to add the word kol? Savar Rav Yosef l'meimar. Rav Yosef was of the opinion that man de isle asara banim, if a person has 10 sons, lo lisku ha'idna chamisha u'lomochar chamisha. He should not separate, or shall we say, divide his crew into 2 halves, and on one day, 5 will come up on Aliyah L'Regel. On the other day, 5 will come up for Aliyah L'Regel. And here we start Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Amalei Abaye, Shita. Raisa didn't have to teach me this chiddush. If a person has 10 sons, he's not going to tell 5 of them, don't come today. You make Aliyah to the Aliyah L'Regel tomorrow. Is Haiminai Mashvislei Potion? Which are the ones of the 10 that he's going to choose? These 5, but you're the losers. You could come the ichur, and delay your mitzvah. Haiminai Mashvislu's reason, and which one of the 5 is going to determine that they are the eager ones? What is he going to throw a lottery? What's he going to do? How is it possible that a father would divide up his sons into 2 groups? So Abai now has to address the question, what do we do with the pasuk kol? Look at Acherim, like the drasha, the halacha of the Acherim. And Acherim, generally speaking, is Rabbi Meir. That's a Gemara in Horios. So what does Rabbi Meir say? Acherim omrim hamakametz v'amitzaref v'choshes v'abursi. These are 3 categories of workers, and their employment involves terrible odor, which gets like almost stuck to their bodies. So, for example, a mekametz is someone who gathers tzoas klovim, which he uses for tanning the horns, and a mitzaref nechoshes is someone who actually takes, let's say, raw lead out of the ground, and he burns it in the ovens, also has a terrible smell. Vabursi is those who tan the hides. All of these are recham ra, machmas balachtam, and abrios misrachakim mihem. So people will stay far away from them. So when they come on Aliyah L'Regel, and they want to go together with their colleagues, their friends are going to just have to drop out. They can't tolerate the smell. And therefore, we'd rather that they stay home than undermine the ability of others to come on Aliyah L'Regel. Because the Torah says, Kol Zechurcha, Misha Yochel Lalos and Kol Zechurcha, someone who could come together with all of Klal Yisrael, Yatzu Elu, to the exclusion of those She'enam Yochel Lalos im Kol Zechurcha. They can't come up with everyone. And that's what the Tana means, says Abai, Ein Nirin Chatzoyim. He who's only capable of coming in a very, very small group of people, and he cannot come together with all of Klal Yisrael, he's Potter ben Ariyah. And now we're up to the Mishnah here on Daf Zayin Amud Beis. We have to keep in mind that at the very beginning of this Masechet, we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Beis that everyone who goes on Aliyah has to bring with him Olas Re'iyah and Shalmei Chagigah. Now, there's another chiyuv carbon, a 3rd category, which is called Shalmei Simcha. But that category of Shalmi Simcha is really not a chovas carbon per se, but rather a chovas simcha. We say ein simcha lebasar, and he's going to use the basar Shalmi Simcha to fulfill his mitzvah v'samach. As far as pure chiyuve carbon is concerned, that he has to bring with him when he goes on aliyah regel, it's olas re'iyah and Chagigah, Shalmi Chagigah. Now the question is, what kinds of funds, meaning monies, and what kinds of animals are going to be brought for these karbanos? So we're going to start with olas re'iyah. The Mishnah says, olos b'moed boats menachul. Now there's a side point here, which is not I shouldn't say unimportant, but it's not high profile now. We're going to have a long discussion about it. The word moed here is a reference to cholot shel moed. We're not sure up front why the Mishnah has to talk about cholot shel moed and not yontif itself. That would seem to be machlokes beisol Beit Shammai, in which case this Mishnah is reflecting the sheet of Beit Shammai. But let's leave that out for now. We'll come to that. But the main point for us is bos minachul. And what that means is the following. We have a rule, and we're going to derive this from various sources in Masechet Bachim, Masechet Menachos, that when you have a chovas carbon, you cannot use another mitzvah or another carbon to fulfill your obligation. That's called bos minachul. For example, you may have monies that are Meiser Sheni monies, right? So on the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, you have to separate 1/10 of your produce as Meiser Sheni, which let's say you will be poda, you'll redeem it onto Mos, and you take those Mos up to Yerushalayim and you buy food in Yerushalayim. So you want to buy food, let's say an animal for meat, and you want to designate it for the mitzvah of olas riyah. You cannot do so. Why? Because he's obligated to bring a chovas riyah into the azara from a carbon, and anything that you're chayav to be makayim in any of them, like for example, Mos Meiser Sheni, cannot be used and rededicated for the chiyuv of olas riyah. And therefore, he has no choice but to take most of chulin, which are not designated for any sort of chiyuv to fulfill any obligation, and use those most chulin to purchase an animal that will become an olas re'iyah. And that's what it means, olazu enaba elamin hachulin. However, now we get to the second category that we had mentioned earlier, not Shalmi Chagigah. We'll come back to Shalmi Chagigah in a minute, but let's fast forward to Shalmi Simcha. Shalmi Simcha, we said, is not an obligation of a carbon per se. It's only a means to fulfill the mitzvah of v'samach b'chagecha, and therefore min ha'maisa. You can take Meiser Sheni money, purchase meat, and in that way you fulfill the mitzvah of Meiser Sheni when you eat that meat. And that meat, let's say the animal, can be designated as Shalmei Simcha. And the Torah has a special ribui, which we'll see later on, that you could fulfill your obligation of Chovot Simcha with any kind of Simcha. Even if you had other Chovos, you can rededicate them for the purpose of Shalmei Simcha. So let's say, for example, he has Mos of Meiser Sheni, that he was Poda Meiser Sheni onto Kesed. He could take the Mos Meiser Sheni and he could buy food and eat it in Yerushalayim, or he could buy a carbon, meaning an animal, zevach, and designate it as a carbon Shalmei Simcha. But now we get up to that third category, the middle category, which is called Shalmei Chagigah. And here we have Machlokas Beisol Beit Shammai. And the question is, do we have to take chulin money, like we did in Olas Re'iyah, in order to purchase Shalmei Chagigah? And that chumrah is actually the Shita base Shammai. B'yom Tov Rishon Shal Pesach. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about why we mentioned here in our Mishnah, Yontav Rishon Shel Pesach. In truth, it could have been any of the three regolim. I mean, there's always going to be a chiv Chagigah, but there's a special chiddush on Pesach because of Yudal. We'll get to that later. Is Beit Shammai Omrim min Achulin. So this karba, which is called the Shalvei Chagigah, has to be purchased from Chulin money. Just like we said by Olas Re'iyah, since you're chayiv in the karba, in this case the karban Chagigah, you can't fulfill your obligation with another obligation, namely Ma'aser Sheni. Beis Hill Omrim Af Mina Ma'aser, that you can use Ma'aser Sheni money for Shalmei Chagigah. And the Gemara later on in Daf Ches is going to have a whole sugya, maybe we'll get to it today, or at least we'll start that sugya today perhaps, of mixing chulin together with Maser. Even Beis Hillel, who allows you to dedicate Ma'aser Sheni money for Shalmei Chagigah, that's only with the tarovis of chulin. And there's going to be a machlokus in the Gemara exactly how to create this tarovis of chulin. Now the Mishnah goes back to Shalmei Simcha. Now, do you have to bring a separate karban that's miyuchad for l'shem Shalmei Simcha? Or is it enough that you can fulfill your mitzvah of Simchas in other ways? The mitzvah is not exhausted and restricted to Shalmei Simcha. And that's what the Mishnah says now. Yisrael yotzing dechovasam b'nidarim b'nidavos u'b'maser behema. So now we're talking about non-Kohanim, and they're allowed to eat kodshim kal. For example, in the case of shlom, they cannot eat kodshim like chatos v'shmos. And therefore, if they bring a karban as a neder or a nedava, and it's a karban shlomim, so they voluntarily took it upon themselves to bring a karban shlomim. They're allowed to eat the meat of the karban shlomim, and with that meat, they can fulfill the mitzvah of v'samachta b'chagecha. Or, for example, a behem of ma'aser behem, right? He has 10 animals in the corral, right? He lets them go out one after the other until he gets to number 10, puts a red stripe on number 10, and he's going to bring that ma'aser behem with him to Yerushalayim when he makes Aliyah L'Regel. And this karma, which is called karban behemas ma'aser sheni, ma'aser behema, is in fact shlomim. And if it's shlomim, you can use the basar and eat it, not only to mekayim the mitzvah of ma'aser behema, but also to mekayim the mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha. But Kohanim, the Kohanim have an expanded possibility. Not only can they be yotzei when the Bailam give them from the nidarim unidavos, chelik in the basar, but even in the case of kodshei kodshim, which is chatos yashamos. Let's say, for example, one of the Olei Ragol, and this was quite common, had violated some sort of Yisur Karis, so when he makes Aliyah L'Regel, he'll bring with him the Chatas, or Korban. And once he brings it to Yerushalayim, the Kohanim will now do the Avodah, and they eat the basar, because it's basar kodshei kodshim, which is not eaten by the Bailam, it's only eaten by Kohanim. And that Achil of the Kohanim could be a double whammy. On the one hand, it's a kiyum of achilas kodshim, and on the other hand, it's a kiyum of the mitzvah of simcha. Or, for example, b'bechar. Okay, this is another concept where if you have a bechar that was born in your Eder, and you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash during the regalim to be makriv, and the Kohanim will eat from that karban, and they can fulfill the mitzvah of simchas yontif or chaz v'shov. For example, in the case of karban shlomim, let's say the Olei Regalim are bringing karban shlomim, they have a chiyuv matnas kahuna called chaz v'shov, and those are eaten by the Kohanim. And if there is enough meat from this karbanos to eat and be mesameach beregel, then he could be yotzei with the meat of chaz v'shov on he could be yotzei mitzvah simchas yontif. Lo ba'ofos v'lo b'menachos. Even though the Kohanim will eat an olas, a chatas of or the menachos after the kmitza. Nevertheless, that would not be fulfillment of simchas yontif because you don't get full from a little chicken or a small amount of a mincha, a carbon mincha, asir seifa, right? That's not going to do it for you. So if you want to get to the kedei svia, then you need basa behema, and that could be possibly chaz v'shol, or alternatively, it could be basar of chatas v'ashamos or basar of bukhar. Gemara asks the following question. The Mishnah says that olos b'moed kamen achul, and we're talking about olos re'iyah, and we're talking about b'moed on chol hamoed. So the Gemara immediately asks, "Ela olos b'moed hu debos min achulin habi yontif min amaser." Are you telling me that if he brings the olas re'iyah on chol hamoed, then he has to buy it from chul? He doesn't have the option of using mos meiser shein. But if it's an olas re'iyah on yontif itself, not on chol hamoed, then if he wants to, he could bring it from mos meiser sheni. Amai davar shebechovi. Whether or not he brings the olas re'iyah on the first day of yontif or on chol hamoed, it always remains a chova. It's an obligatory carbon. And not only that, the Torah says that if you would come on aliyah regular to the azar without a carbon, is you violate a law. The Torah says, "Lo yiraz panay reikam." So obviously, we're talking about a full-fledged chova of olas re'iyah. And kol davar shebechova eino ba ela min hachulin. This is the overriding principle that when the Torah obligates you to bring a carbon, then whether it's a carbon of a kapara for a chet or if it's a chova to bring a carbon at a certain time period in the Hebrew calendar year, it has to be purchased from chulin. You know, he can't just pay up his chov to Meiser Sheni and use that money for a chova. So how could it be that the Mishnah limits this halacha of minachulin to the case of moed, of chol hamoed? What has it got to do with chol hamoed? Even on Yom Tov Rishon, the same thing would apply. Because this principle called davar shebechova ein haba el minachulin, which is Gemara in a number of places of Shas, right? Psukim. Drink here. And if you'll answer, that's the reason why the Mishnah mentions olos b'moed is derech agav. Maybe it's teaching us something by the by. Hakamashmalan, the olos b'moed bos, the yontiv. Maybe the Mishnah wants to teach us that olos re'iyah, you're allowed to be makriv only on chol hamoed, which we're going to see in a minute is the shita of Beit Shammai. But on Yontif, you're not allowed to be makriv a carbon olas re'iyah. And the reason for that is since you can bring it with tashlumin all the days of the regel, then why bring it on Yontif itself? Because we have a principle that we override, which is called olas Shabbos b'Shabbat, but we override Shabbos or Yontif when it's a time urgent mitzvah, a carbon that has to be brought today. Like the Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Abayim on Shabbos. So we'll override the Shabbos. But why override Yontif if you could do the same thing and fulfill the same mitzvah tomorrow on Chol HaMoed? Is then, if that's what the Mishnah is teaching us by mentioning Moed here, then Kiman, then the Mishnah is reflecting Hushita Ki Beit Shammai. This now we have a Mishnah in Chagigah later on at Daf Yitzan. Beit Shammai Omer B'Viyim Shlamim. According to Beit Shammai, you're allowed to bring on Yontif Shlomim Fakrova. And the reason for that is because it's Ochal Nefesh. The Torah says you're allowed to do Malacha for Ochal Nefesh. And Shlomim is Nechal Abailim. So it's a Tzorach Machal Hedjot. And you're allowed to do any Malacha with Tzorach Machal Hedjot. So that with regard to Shlomim, Beit Shammai has no problem if you want to bring a carbon Shlomim on Yontif. And you'll eat the basar, and you'll be mekayim the mitzvah of achasher yochal l'chol nefesh. V'yein somchen aleh. The Rabbanim made a gzeira that you're not allowed to do smicha on a behema on Yontif. That's what's called the shvus. And this shvus has to do with a more general shvus about animals, that we don't benefit from animals on Shabbos or Yontif. And that also we'll have later on in Masechet also lismoch al behema b'yontif. And again, the smicha has to be right before the shechita. So he's doing the shechita on Yontif, and the reason for that is it's shlomim and it's ochal nefesh. And the law is that the smicha has to come contiguous to the right before the shechita. And we're not going to allow that smicha. Why? Because of the shvus of animals on Yontif. Avolo olos. But in the case of olos, which are kulo kolil, and the entire carbon is muktar gabi mitzvah, so there's no element of ochel nefesh for adam. And Beit Shammai in the Gemara Beitz on Daf Chaf derived from the pasuk hu levado yosel lachem v'lo legavoa. So it's tzarek gavoa in a carbon we don't do on Yontif, even though you might consider it a meleches ochel nefesh. Like, for example, shechita is a meleches ochel nefesh, but the Torah excludes it on Yontif under the pasuk lachem v'lo legavoa. So that's the shita of Beit Shammai. So you can be makriv an ola's re'iyah on Chol Hamoed, but not on Yontif, because it's kulul Hashem, and therefore comes under the halach of lachem v'lo legavoa. And like we said before, it's not a carbon that's urgently time sensitive. Ubeis Hill omrim meviim shlomim v'olos b'solchen olos. You're allowed to be makriv anything that has zman akrava on Yontif. Again, if it's, let's say, shlomim b'nedav, so there's no need to bring it dafka on Yontif. Delay it. But if you're talking about a carbon of olas re'iyah, and there's a mitzvah of aliyah l'regel, so the Torah is allowing you to do that krava on Yontif Rishon as well. And once the Torah allows you to bring the carbon shlomim with the olas re'iyah on Yontif, then immediately you're allowed to smicha. We're not going to prohibit smicha, which in and of itself is only a shvus, when the Torah is matir doraisa for the sake of the carbon. He writes here, "Shelo gazim chacham shvus levatel mitzvah smicha v'karbonos shemut l'akrivam b'yontif." Now the Gemara is saying, if our Mishnah mentions Moed in order to exclude Yontif, that's a reflection of the Shita of Beit Shammai. We have a principle, Beit Shammai Beis Hill is Beis Shammai and a Mishnah. So it's very difficult to say that our Mishnah reflects the Shita of Beit Shammai. So the Gemara answers, no. The Tana did not mean to imply that you're not allowed to be makriv olos on Yontif. We paskin like Beis Hill, you're allowed to be makriv olos on Yontif. You're even allowed to do smicha on Yontif. But rather, chisure mechser of achiktani. olos, nidorim, unidavos. So let's say, for example, during the course of the year, he was mischayev, he took upon himself a chiyuv, b'nidava, or nidava, neder, to bring a carbon ola, and now he's going on Aliyah Yerushalayim Beregel, and he wants to bring them along to be Makayim his chova. And now it's a chova, even though it's called a nidava, but once he designates it as a carbon, now he's chayim. And he wants to bring it when he's going on Aliyah Regel and be makrivid on the Regel. Is b'moed bos that only on Chol HaMoed you're allowed to be makriv olos and nidorim. But Yontif ain't a bos. We're not going to be makriv on Yontif, even according to Beis Hillel, that which is a nidava, right? Well, why bring an nidava on Yontif? Do you lose anything by waiting until Chol HaMoed? So that's as far as the Nidarim Unidavos are concerned. Einon Bos beyond. And even Beis Hillel would agree in Makriv on Yontif, Nidarim Unidavos, because it's not time urgent. It's not Bo B'yom on Yontif that you're obligated in this mitzvah. But Olas Re'iyah, that's generated, that chova emerges from the Regel. So that even if, as Beit Shammai would argue, there's no ochel nefesh here because the entire ola is kuli kolil, and there's no achilas adam. Nevertheless, Beis Hillel argue that it's mutter on yontif, olas re'iyah, ba afilu b'yontif. If it's a carbon shekavul zman, the Torah says on this calendar date you have to bring a carbon, then you're allowed to bring that carbon on yontif. Ukshiba. And now the Brisa tells us that, well, I should say it's the Brisa, this is the Chisurei Mechzer of the Mishnah, but in any event, the Mishnah is telling us that Eino Ba Ela Min HaChulin. In other words, that Krav on Yontif is okay, so we don't have to wait till Chol HaMoed, because we're going now to Beis Hillel. And the halacha is that since it's a chova, we go back to our original principle, kol davar shebechova eino ba ela min achulin. So that's as far as olas re'iyah is concerned. As far as shalmei simcha concerned, which is just simply a mitzvah achilas basar for simchas haregel v'samachtu b'chagecha boin af min ha'maser, you don't have to take it from chulin, you can take it from Mos Meiser Sheni. And this is not a chova because the Torah was marba all minei simcha. There are many different ways or conduits of means to an end of bringing, of achieving simcha. This is just one of them. So he's not really obligated in the carbon per se. His mitzvah is achilas basar. And he'll eat the basar of a carbon shlamim, and then he has a kiyum shalmei simcha v'samachtu b'chagecha, and I can take basar kachim from a different carbon, let's say, for example, maser, and I can use that to fulfill my obligation of shalmei simcha, as long as I eat the meat. And if that be the case, then there's no problem in buying shalmei simcha with Mos Meiser Sheni. And Chagigah Yontif Harishon Shel Pesach is Beit Shammai Omrim Min HaChulin, Beis Hillel Omrim Min HaMaser. Again, Min HaMaser, as we said before, means when you mix Chulin and Maser together. Tanya Nami Hachi Nidarim Nidavos Olos Nidarim Nidavos B'Moed Bos. Only on Chol HaMoed you can be makriv a carbon nidava. B'Yontif Einam Bos. Omer olas re'iyah, where the zman is to bring the ola with aliyah l'regel on the first day of Yontif, ba afilu b'Yontif. Ukshi ba ena ba el min achut. V'shalmi simcha ba en af min hamaser. Now Chagigah is Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. Beit Shammai omrim min achulin uBeit Hillel omrim min hamaser, which means when you mix it together. Just to summarize, the Havamina was that the Mishnah is prohibiting Olas Re'i on Yom Tov Rishon, and that would reflect the Shita Beit Shammai against Beit Hillel. But the Maskana is with the Chisurei Mechzera that when we add the word Moed into the Mishnah and we exclude therefore Yom Tov, that's talking not about Olas Re'i, but rather the Mishnah is referring to Olos Nidarim Unidavos. And the principle is that Nidarim, Olos Nidarim Unidavos is Dafka B'Moed, but on Yom Tov Einam Bos. Because there's no time urgency, it's not a carbon check Kavua Zman. That's Nidarim Unidavos. But as far as Olos Re'i is concerned, they still say, well, that's Kavua Zman. You're supposed to bring it together with your Aliyah L'Regel on the first day that you get to Yerushalayim, on the first day of Yom Tov. Now the Mishnah mentions Chagigah's Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. Why? I mean, when you're quoting the Machlokes between Beit Hillel Beit Shammai about whether it's Ba Min HaChulin or Ba Min HaMaser, why would the Tana mention Yom Tov Shel Pesach? What's unique about Yom Tov Shel Pesach? Maishna Chagigah's Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. We're talking about Shalmei Chagigah. Shalmei Chagigah brought on all three regalim. No difference whatsoever between Pesach, Shavuos. So what did the Tana have to confuse me by talking about Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach? Amar Rav Ashi, Mamash Malon, the Tana wants to teach me a din about Erev Pesach. Namely, here's the deal. Chagigah's Chamisha Sar in. Only in the case of the Chagigah on the 15th of Nisan, which is the day of Chovas Aliyah L'Regel. On the 15th of Nisan, you're an Ola Regel, and then you bring the Karma Chagigah on the 15th of Nisan. Again, it's Eino Ba Ela Ben Achulin. Why is it Eino Ba Ela Ben Achulin? Because the Chagigah of the first day of Yom Tov, in this case the 15th of Nisan, is an obligation. But what's the Mishnah being mechadish now? This is the diuk on the other side. But Chagigahs Arba Salo. In the case of Chagigahs Arba Sar, which we'll see exactly why you do it, that has to do with the Achil of Korban Pesach, and that's on the 14th of Nisan. It's not a chova unto itself. It's only a conduit to help you fulfill the mitzvah of Achilas HaPesach. And therefore, since in and of itself it's not a chova, then we're not going to limit you and say you have to bring it from Chulin, because only in a chova you have to bring it from Chulin. But Chagigahs Arba Sar, which by implication is what the Mishnah is coming from Mechadish, that doesn't require Chulin. It can be able to with most Masechet. And why? Because Chagigahs Arba Sar in and of itself is not a carbon chova. Iftarat. And here we see on the top of Daf Ches, Alma, because Savar, Rav Ashi holds that Chagigahs Arba Sar lav d'oraisa. There's no chova to bring a Chagigah on the 14th of Nisan, when he brings it together with the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. That's not a Torah obligation. What happens, and this is Sugim Psachim, I think it's on Daf Samach Zayin, but let's see if he tells you where. Samach Tes. And the Mishnah there in Psachim establishes that if, let's say, you have a Chabura for the Korban Pesach, and you have many, many people that have signed up and registered for that Chabura. So you won't have what's called Kidei Sevilla. The Korban Pesach, the lamb, is not meaty enough, it's not large enough in volume to guarantee that each member of the Chabura will get enough for Korban Pesach, which is called Ein Kidei Sevilla L'chol Echad Min HaPesach Levado. You have so many people eating such a small volume of Korban Pesach meat that you won't be able to say you ate the meat of the Korban Pesach ala sova. In order to achieve ala sova, because there's a mitzvah called a Pesach Nechal ala sova, you're going to have to eat the meat of Chagigah Sarbasa. So the whole purpose of bringing the Chagigah Sarbasa is so that you begin to fill up your belly, and then when you can eat the Korban Pesach, it'll be eaten ala sova. So that's not a chiyuv d'oraisa. I mean, this is only a way of engineering and organizing it in an event that you have many people who have money on one Korban Pesach, but there's no separate chiyuv on the 14th of Nisan to bring a Korban Chagigah. There's a mitzvah of Chagigah's Yontif on the 15th of Nisan, but not on the 14th. He mentions here in the note that Chagigah's Arbasar will be brought with three conditions are fulfilled. Number one, if there's a small volume of Pesach meat and a larger volume of people who are money on the Pesach. Number two, it must be that our boss of Benisa was on a chol any day of the week from Sunday to Friday. And number three, it's got to be brought b'tara. If any one of those three conditions are missing, then you don't bring the Chagigah with the Korban Pesach. So you see that the Korban Chagigah is an iffy, conditional kind of korban. It's not an absolute chova. If you need all these conditions to be fulfilled, then obviously it's not a korban chova. It's only, in a sense, a facilitator, an auxiliary korban for the sake of the kiyum mitzvah v'achluas habasa hazeh b'layla hu, that you have to eat a kizayis basum and a pesach on the night of the 15th, la sova, ala sova. Okay, so this is up here.